Sweet, we are getting connected on one platform, two platforms. Can we get to three? And that means four. Sweet, we are connected on all four platforms: YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter all at the same time.
Wow.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, so it might take a minute or two for people to get on, but I am so excited to have you on today, Keith. So for anybody watching, I'm actually super excited to have this as kind of a reference video that we can share, and I can't wait to make clips out of this too, because I think we're going to get some really great content. But everybody, today I have on a very special guest, Dr. Keith Edmonds. He does a lot of things. One of the things that he does that is relevant to me, what I do, is he's one of the leading experts in voting science, particularly with proportional representation. And that's really relevant because proportional representation is really starting to pop off. You're starting to hear about it a lot in the United States, in Canada, and in the United Kingdom right now. So kind of a big deal. The problem that I find is that a lot of people who advocate for proportional representation don't really know much about it. And so that's why I'm super excited to have Keith on.
Bit of an understatement, yes, definitely true.
Yeah. And so I think this will be really great to kind of address some of the core concerns that people have and issues and things that people think about when it comes to proportional representation, what their goals are, and maybe some of the things that they're missing, as well as how to think about it. I said United States, Canada, and United Kingdom, but we also have to think about it differently in each of those three countries. They all have different requirements or different things that they're looking for and trying to get. And I think this is really great because Keith is actually in Canada and is mostly focused on Canadian politics, and so we'll get to experience a little bit of the contrast between Canada and the U.S. Actually, Keith, I want to give you a moment to introduce yourself and just share your credentials, and maybe we can just start getting into it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, I'm Keith Edmonds. My background is originally in theoretical physics. I used to work at CERN, and as a lot of physicists have done in the last few years, has transitioned into data science. So that's machine learning and advanced analytics for businesses. And got into voting theory and election science maybe 2014, 2015, sometime around there. I've always had a bit of an interest in voting in general and anything with kind of the game theory implications that it does. And I mean, my interest has just kind of grown and gotten more and more involved. And now I have a board position for the Equal Vote Coalition. And I also represent I'm the director of research for Canada for the Equal Vote Coalition.
Sweet, yeah. And so Keith Edmonds and Dr. Jameson Quinn, I know you two have worked together quite a bit on some of the bleeding edge science, particularly in proportional representation. And basically what we've learned is that there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah. James and I have worked together a lot. He's very good, and I like working with him because we don't have the exact same assumptions or goals. And so when we agree on something, we can be quite sure that it's the right path.
Yeah, for sure. So let's. I'll let you kind of make your Canada pitch. It sounded like you were eager to say something about what's happening in Canada and what you want to say about what's going on in Canada.
Right. So in Canada, we have parliamentary systems, both federally and in each province. And one of the things that ramped up my interest in election science was the third referendum campaign in British Columbia, where I live. Interestingly, there's a new movement in Prince Edward Island, one of our other provinces, just announced today. So rather than pushing for referendums, the new strategy is to try and get a citizens' assembly. The difference there being that instead of having a vote from everybody in the area on what system they want, they take a few, maybe a few hundred citizens and then teach them everything about it. The problem being that on complex issues, that tends to be where democracy fails. If you have a very complex issue that nobody can understand, it's very easy to insert propaganda or other things like that. So if you want to make a complex decision, you're better off getting a bunch of people together and explaining them the details and then having them make the decision. So it's a little bit ironic that they're going around voting to get better voting. That irony is not lost on me, but I think it's a viable strategy, and it will very likely be the path forward, because it's very hard to get a referendum through, because people are basically afraid of what they don't understand, and nobody understands proportional representation. So it's a hard nut to crack. What I was saying was what's happening. What did happen, I think today or yesterday, was Prince Edward Island had decided to have a citizens' assembly. There was one that was voted on federally, and that passed. But then we had an election, and so everything is kind of back to square one. They'd have to vote on it again. So I don't know whether that's going to happen again federally, but the fact that there's movement in Prince Edward Island is pretty interesting. The next step is deciding which experts get to be there. That's always been my concern about citizens' assemblies, is that you can get any group of people to come to any conclusions if you can control what information they get. So if neither myself nor Jameson Quinn or any of the other experts, like maybe Warren or Toby, are not involved in that, that's going to be a red flag. There is a very powerful lobby, the same lobby in the States that runs most of the show down there. I'm cautiously optimistic that they're going to let other voices present.
Gotcha. I will name this lobby by name. I have no reservations about that. It's Fair Vote. One of the things I find very ironic is that Fair Vote Canada, very explicitly has stated in the past that ranked choice instant runoff voting does not get rid of duopoly rule, and yet that seems to be a lot of the messaging here. Despite the fact I recently found a page on Fair Vote, United States Fair Vote, that says that it doesn't get rid of the spoiler effect. It says that it doesn't help elect third parties or independents. And I intend to advertise that page of Fair Vote a little bit more.
It's probably quite old. They probably realized they wanted to stop saying that.
Yes. And so real quick, there is somebody who asked a question in the comments. They asked you, what do you think on Jameson Quinn's view on reweighted methods? So that's diving a little bit deep really quickly, but
I would love to jump into that, but I'm not exactly sure what explicitly Jameson's Quinn view is on reweighted methods. I think by reweighted methods you mean things like reweighted range voting, which would be like the Webster method. I thought he was okay with them. They don't pass quota rules, which I think he's not okay with. But I don't know. I can't comment. So you want me to comment on his comments on something? Yeah,
fair enough. So I'll say, if you want to throw a little more detail in the chat or clarify on that. But let's break it down a little bit then. Let's just ask the question, like, describe to people, like, what is proportional representation? Help us understand that first basic point.
So the reason why nobody understands what it is because it's actually a really complicated question. The simple version doesn't get you all the way to a solution. The simple version being, if everybody voted for a party, then there would be equitable distribution between the votes for parties and the seats in Parliament. However, we don't vote for parties. We have a system, single member plurality, first past the post, which makes it roughly equivalent to voting for parties. So you can do the same calculation. You can say, you voted for this person, they're a member of this party, therefore you voted for that party, which isn't really true, but it's close enough to being true that I don't tend to complain about that too much. So that's the basic idea of proportional representation. You can measure it. There's a bunch of different metrics to use for that. Gallagher Index is probably the most popular. And it just compares like the percentage of each party you get and the percentage of each vote you get, and how closely those sets of ratios combine together. And the problem being is that voting for parties is somewhat opposed to the concept of a representative government. What everybody should be doing. I mean, if you read Considerations on a Representative Government by John Stuart Mill, he talks a lot about how we are enfranchised with the right for representation, and we delegate that representation to another person who goes and represents us. And that's supposed to be kind of a from me to my representative to the government. Once you start voting for parties, then it becomes a top-down thing, and who gets to be that specific individual representative loses that connection, it loses that individual touch. So it's relatively easy to come up with a PR system when you're voting for parties. When you're voting for people, it's pretty hard. You can, and there's two basic sources of disproportionality. One would be vote splitting, and we can solve that in a number of ways. Go to approval or star or score or whatever you want. But that's not going to get you to full proportional representation, because there could be a party that, say, has 10% across the board for the entire country in every district, and they don't win any seats because they don't have enough to win a seat in any riding. So to compensate for that, you actually have to share information between different districts in order to do some sort of a calculation to make it match this idea of proportional representation. However, if you want to get rid of vote splitting, you're not voting for a single person, so you don't have that one-to-one link between the person and the party, so the original calculation no longer works. And so you have to come up with a new calculation which has kind of the same spirit. And this is where everything really goes sideways, because there's a whole bunch of different definitions, and some only apply for ranking systems, some only apply for cardinal or scoring systems. I tend to like winner set stability. But that, how can I phrase that? Jameson would probably say that's a bit too much of a purist definition. Or something, you probably wouldn't use those words, but that's kind of a very balanced way of viewing it. Whereas he favors something that's more about so there aren't words for these things, so it's very difficult to describe. He wants each party to be as well represented as possible. And so you want people deeper or more polarized in each group. Whereas I would tend to favor something where people can kind of be balanced between parties, and it's more of a kind of an amorphous blob, and you count this towards this, and you count this towards this. And the systems each of us have invented somewhat represent that distinction. And we can get into specific systems there, but that's proportional representation. And so the issue is that you can measure it in some cases, you can define it in a half dozen different ways, and everybody tends to not agree that the systems that they don't favor are proportional. So sometimes people will say STV isn't proportional because it's, it passes the hair quota criteria and it passes a bunch of other criteria, but it's not proportional in the sense that, say, party list would be proportional. But I would say, if we're going to define proportional in a good way, then partisan voting isn't representative. So if you're after representation, you want representation of people by people, not of people by parties. So, you get into this debate and it gets really muddy really quick.
Yeah. So there are a couple things I want to say. So when I talk about proportional representation, I like to describe it in a way that maybe connects with the American experience, because we use, in a lot of our elections, we have single winners. Well, so we do a lot of single winner elections. So I like to try to connect the dot from single winner to proportional. So first and foremost is like,
you have houses. You have a House of Representatives.
We have a House of Representatives, but there's still single winner districts.
Same thing in Canada. And that's the push. I mean, our House is elected in the same way as your House.
Okay, yeah. But so the point I want to make is, so to get from single winner to proportional representation, so first is you switch from single winner to multi-winner, where you have multiple winners. But the fundamental problem of just taking a single winner method and just picking the top 2 or 3 or 4 candidates using that same single winner method by iterating it over and over again, is you can run into a problem where you can get, if you have a bunch of similar candidates, they can end up dominating all of those spots when you actually have a more diverse group of voters.
Yeah.
And so
the so-called block methods, right?
Yeah. The block methods, BLOC. And then, so proportional representation is basically adding in a whole bunch of extra complicated math, effectively to try.
Not a good way to say it, but yeah.
Yeah, the whole point is to try to make it so it's still so there's still multi-winner elections, but you're adjusting it to try to match the winners in proportion to to proportionally represent the different factions of voters. And I say the word faction specifically because that can manifest as parties, but it can also just manifest as demographics or whatever else it may be, or political leanings. And I think that is important, because then you can get into the debate of like, are you doing a party list? Are you just focusing it on parties, or are you making it a more candidate focused proportional representation method, which is what you were talking about? I agree with you that when you focus it on parties, that does kind of simplify it in people's minds of this faction concept, but then you're centralizing power into parties, which is like fundamentally anti-democratic in my mind. That's the way I think about it. It's like,
I would tend to agree.
People. Yeah, and so like that is like just the very first bit of like, all right, now how do we actually create this? How do we do the math? And then that's when it gets really, really muddy, as you were saying. We got some clarification on that question from earlier, so I'll read that off. So he said, same guy says, Jameson Quinn likes place voting,
Right.
but likes PAD for nonpartisan contexts. PAD is a Buckland-style system where prefer votes are used first, but also counts approve votes.
Right.
Does that make any sense to you? I'm a little lost.
Yeah,
I know
I'm
place,
actually
but
not
PAD I'm unfamiliar with.
super well read up on place. I probably should be, but I'm not.
His FAQ is a little tough to get through, but
that was kind of what I was alluding to earlier. Both our axioms and our destination is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I think he views place as the ultimate best system. I would view sequentially spent score as the ultimate best system. With the qualifier that's in a perfect world. We can get into the reservations I have about that in the real world later. But the thing about the Buckland and the reweighting, yeah. So I think I understand the kernel of the question there. If it's what I would call the difference between spending like sequentially spent score, or reweighting like in reweighted range voting, or allocation methods like allocated score. So should you take all of the vote from the most favored people, or should you take some of the vote somehow related to how much they favor that person? I'm in the second camp. I think Jameson's in the first camp. The distinction here is kind of what we got into earlier with the different definitions of proportional representation. So the view that it matters, you should only take away some amount from each person and try and balance that out. That's basically the ethos of stable winner sets. The more allocative one, where you try and take all of the representation, I don't want to say it that way. You allocate all of the voter to the representative, independent of how much they had voted them, but by preference across all the voters, so that the ones who supported most go to that person. That's more in line with something like proportionality for solid coalitions. And I think there's a really interesting debate to be had there. And I've had several hours of that debate with Jameson, but I don't think I would say it's not settled. I don't know if you'd agree with that. I think there's definitely more learnings to be had there. I'd love to do some more simulations. I'd love to understand a little bit more depth to that. But basically, in the end, I disagree that we should be allocating all of somebody's weight because there's edge cases. So if, say, there's nearly a quota's worth of people who give 5 out of 5, and then the next person is somebody that gives 1 out of 5, if you sequence them, and you allocate all of that person's 1 out of 5, that seems undemocratic in some sense. It seems like, and then what happens if the next person being elected, it comes down to a tiebreaker between what that person's influence would have done. I can see these edge cases, and Jameson has said that if you try to be that well defined, you're over defining stuff. He used an analogy about like image enhancement, about how you're focusing too much on the exact hard edges and things like that. But I think there is more to be learned in terms of exact how exact you want to be with that. And this gets into, like I said earlier, I like sequentially spent score, but this isn't a perfect world. This isn't a non-strategic world. In a strategic world, I probably would favor allocated score, which is similar-ish, but does the full allocation method. So there are different strategies that affect both of those systems, but I have seen a decent argument that sequentially spent score is slightly more susceptible to a burying method than allocated score. And so that's kind of getting at why Jameson thinks that these methods where you allocate your whole vote, because then you have less strategic incentive to give kind of a half or something like that for somebody. You're going to be more inclined to vote slightly more honestly.
Yeah, and so let's just clarify a couple things real quick. So allocated score is the kind of a different name for the what is star PR or star the proportional star voting, which is the one that was officially endorsed by the Equal Vote Coalition and Star Voting Action. But when that happened at the same time, there was this recognition that sequentially spent score is still like competitive in that similar space.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we re-rated range voting and sequential Monroe also got a nod at the same time.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
We talked a lot about kind of this this trade-off where you're on some sort of a surface where there's a trade-off between two things. And you don't have to take all this and none of that, or all this and none of that. You can kind of trade them off. But we don't know kind of the shape of that trade-off. We can't really rationalize it that well. And the idea was that under strategic considerations, the optimal trade-off would be allocated score. And I am fairly sympathetic to that argument. I would say the numbers aren't 100% in, but allocated score is slightly simpler. So that's makes it easier to explain to people. And it is making a stronger case against strategy whereas the sequentially spent score is kind of making the case that you want to be more exact. Would you rather be strategy resistant or more exacting? I don't know.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I would say that both systems are so incredibly similar relative to the other options that it kind of doesn't matter. If we get either of them, then all of a sudden people will start studying them, and the next decade we'll have the answer. So I'm not super concerned about that. We're arguing over the last percent, whereas we're at 1%, and most people want to go to 70%, and we're like, oh, do we want 98 or 99%? We're not sure which one's which. Kind of in the end, let's just do it, and then we'll worry about that when we get there. Like incremental gain is the name of the game.
Yeah, and that's actually one thing that I think is really important. That like this is something that I run into with voting enthusiasts all the time is they get very stuck on that last percent, and it's like, well, it's like people will make all the time. I have people who come to me and like, well, I think we should make this alteration to approval voting to like cover this corner case, or this alteration to star voting to cover this corner case, and I'm like, it's the ratio of simplicity to accuracy is more important than the accuracy itself. that like yes, you do need to have like a
Yeah,
minimum amount of simplicity. You do need to have a minimum amount of accuracy, but like it is not worth the extra complexity to get that extra percentage point of accuracy.
exactly.
Um,
And that's why Center for Election Science tends to just stick with approval.
mhm.
It's arguably less complicated than the existing system.
Yeah,
Like
I made that
you have to make
argument
more,
on a
more marks on
stream.
a ballot, but you kind of your decision making process is simpler.
You're removing a restriction that we
Yeah,
currently have. Your vote consists of your support and lack thereof for each candidate. Our current system restricts you to only being able to support one candidate. Approval voting does away with that restriction and it just allows you to show that support or not show it.
exactly. When I wrote I wrote a paper in when the referendum was going on in BC because they were trying to decide on systems,
Mhm.
and I angered a few people on this actually. So they wanted a PR system,
Mhm.
and I recommended approval voting, single member district approval voting, not PR. Very simple. I guarantee it would have won. And so what we ended up doing was going for some PR systems that are none of them were particularly good. A lot of them were weirdly defined, and it lost. And so the point there being is that approval is so simple. We could have convinced people very quickly and explained it very quickly. And what it does is it gets rid of vote splitting, which, as I said earlier, is one of the two major sources of low PR. So if you measure PR in the traditional sense, or it's kind of hard even in approval, but there are ways that you could come up with a way to define PR with approval voting. There's a bit of a spectrum, and single member plurality is probably the worst for PR, unless I don't know about a system. I guess maybe some sort of totalitarian government or something like that. But in democracy, that's the worst voting system. But I would say that approval voting is probably halfway down that line. And I've never seen simulations to quantify this. And then you have the fully PR things over here. So we could have easily gotten halfway. And that's halfway on one metric. There's
Right.
dozens of important metrics. I'm never going to say proportional representation is the be all and end all of electoral reform. It is one
Yes.
thing, and I would also argue that it's probably not the most important thing. I don't know what the most important thing is. Probably expression, being able to express yourself on the ballot, is
I,
probably the most important thing to
I
me.
think it's important that people understand the method and appreciate it. But if you achieve that and you have the expression in a way that is honest, then now you have enough data to create accurate results. And also, like you're going to be equal. Oh, look, we just named the five pillars of the Equal Vote Coalition. Um, and I want to so a couple things I want to say. Number one, we got another comment. The same guy, iBods91. I still don't know who they actually are, but they're always commenting on stuff. They said, and I think they were researching this recently. They said single district approval was used in Greece, and it led to multi-party democracy. That's like a really important thing for people to understand. That like when some of the leading voting scientists, so whether you're talking about Warren Smith, Clay Shentrup, yourself, Jameson Quinn, whoever, say, hey, no, really, like you don't need proportional representation is not the end all be all. Just getting a
Yeah,
significantly better single winner is like super duper like that's a big deal.
and
Like
because of
this,
accountability, I would say is the main thing. So if you have a single member district with accountable people, so our current system doesn't lead to accountability. But if races were closer, you would write to. So I've written to my MP dozens of times. I've never had a reply. I've bumped into him at outings, and he'll say nice stuff, and then I write to him the
um,
next day. He says, "Oh, I just didn't get the email. Write to me tomorrow." Right?
MP
But
stands for
that
member of
thing,
parliament. Just for Americans, MP stands for member of parliament. It's
yes,
equivalent
sorry,
to a representative.
yeah, which is what's that in the States? Is that
We just
the
say
name of it?
representative. We say the full word.
Representative?
It's
Okay,
obnoxious to type out all the time.
right. Okay, so he has no incentive to actually talk to a single voter. He's all about narratives and that sort of thing because it's about kind of landslide victories and strategy, vote splitting, all that sort of stuff. If things were very close and we had approval voting, and he had a candidate that was going to run against him that was very similar to him, so would get very similar amount of votes. And I wrote an email to him, and I said, "All right, I'm gonna go to your competitor if you don't answer this email." He's going to answer that email. So what really one of the things that really matters to me is this kind of maintenance of this say lineage of democratic will. So if I'm getting a representative, that representative actually has to listen to and represent me. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like partisan systems where you vote for a party, and why I would also be reasonably happy with a single winner system, because you have a lot more of that. If you have a multi-winner system and you have 5 representatives, then they normally 5. You're going to write 5 emails, and every single one can go, this is the other guy's problem, or the other 4 guys' problems, right? Or girls. And I kind of am uneasy about that. I've spoken to Australians that have that, but I've never spoken to an Australian that has talked to their member of parliament. Maybe I just don't know influential enough people down there, but I'm not sure that that's part of their system. And is that not part of their system because they don't have single member districts? I think there's a lot of investigations into these sorts of more political effects that could happen. And so I'm kind of uneasy about giving up having a one-to-one relationship with your representative. I'd rather improve that one-to-one relationship. And if we could do that, have a one-to-one relationship and have PR, then that is what I think is the kind of creme de la creme. And there are ways to do this. This guy up here in Canada, Byron Becker out of, I think, U of T, and he came up with a method to take any multi-winner system and turn it into a single district system and keep the PR. And so what I was saying earlier about it is in order to get PR, you have to kind of pass information between districts. And what you do is you just cluster 5 districts together. You have all the same number of people running in all the same ridings, but as soon as that riding is somebody from that riding's elected, all those other people lose. So they're taken out of the race. And so you represent a specific area, but you're in like this cluster of 5. And there's a trade-off here. Election science is all about trade-offs. The trade-off being that you may not get the 5 most representative. So the 5 most representative people that a regular multi-winner system may have won could have all been in the same district. But there's going to be strategy. People are going to move themselves around. Oh, I don't want to run in that district because that guy's there, or something like that. So I think that would maintain the one-to-one. It would give us PR. It works on any multi-winner system, so we don't even have to kind of go back and redo that. So that's kind of my goal, but it's not really in the narrative. It's not something that's talked about on virtually anywhere.
Yeah, and I want to come back around to Jameson Quinn's place, because he recently had like this tweet of like, the U.S. were to adopt something today, like here are 3 options, which would you go for? And I went through all of them, and I landed on place. And there's like a really important thing about proportional representation methods that I want to highlight that people don't talk about, I don't think, nearly often enough in voting methods in general, which is precinct summability. This is really, really vital. So the concept of precinct summability is that each individual precinct can, and this is just based on what method you're using, is able to add up and sum the results just within that precinct, and then report those totals publicly to the media, to the public, whatever. And then anybody, anywhere at all, can take these results from each precinct and then further add them up and find a winner. And this is really, really valuable because some methods, whether you're talking about ranked choice instant runoff voting in the single winner space, or many proportional representation methods, at least the expressive ones, are not precinct summable. And so what you have to do then, what that requires, is that the counting, the tabulation, is centralized to a single point of failure.
Yeah.
And this is relevant to the country that you live in. So in the United States is a long-standing military and economic superpower, the world has a lot of interest in our elections. There are a lot of people all over the world who care more about our elections than they do about their own, because who knows what our military is going to do to them. And like, I don't want to get into the politics right now of like, is that even like an okay thing to be a military superpower? Like, I'm just acknowledging reality.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, the
and
United States is definitely a military superpower. That is not up for debate.
yeah, and so like when we start talking about voting methods that require this, the decentralization of counting is the most important factor in election security in the United States
Yeah.
that provides a robustness against scaled election attacks.
Yes.
Um,
And this is another point that the people that are in favor of a single winner system often make. So if you want to do approval, you can do that in a precinct summable way.
mhm.
I'm gonna have to go. I didn't know we were gonna be talking about place this much. I'm gonna have to go read up on that again. It's been a couple of years, but yeah. So that's another kind of feather in the cap for approval or score or star or whatever, because of the precinct summability that matters in the end, especially in Canada, because we don't do voting machines here. Everything's hand counted. It's a bit of a point of pride. Changing that is another one of the sticking points to moving to PR. So you can hand count STV. I believe Ireland hand counts, unless I'm mistaken. And
Takes forever, but
yeah, right. So and that's actually probably the best argument for STV.
They do a two-way communication though, and so again, like this is the thing that like they are much better coordinated there than we are here.
Sure.
In the U.S. at least. I don't know. I can't speak on Canada.
I've never been involved in counting in Canada, so I can't comment. But the point is that when you compare STV to literally any of the good cardinal systems, it's terrible. Except it's probably a little bit better for hand counting because you're passing around whole ballots. Everything else requires you to keep track of fractions. Mm-hmm. That said, though, a lot of the surplus handling mechanisms in STV. So I'd have to also read up on exactly how they handle surpluses in Ireland.
It depends. Yeah, it depends what version of STV you're using. There are a lot of different ways to implement
so
it.
They probably do a random sample, which can bring an element of
unease,
first chance, but ease of manipulation, let's say.
Yeah. And this is what I want to. This is why I want to say why I actually like place voting. So, place voting is actually a choose one method. There's single winner districts. But the idea is that
what are you choosing? Person?
So you're choosing a person, but that candidate on your ballot. So on your ballot you have all the different candidates who are running in your district plus a line for write-in, and we'll come back to that write-in line in a moment.
Right.
But then after each candidate is a list of other candidates or parties, entities. I say, and there's some specifics about it that aren't important for this conversation. The idea is that if your candidate you voted for gets eliminated, your vote transfers to the next thing that they endorsed, next entity.
It's a bit like asset voting, right?
Yeah, kind of. It's like a delegated system. And these lists are published ahead of time. They're publicly available, so you know what it's going to be going into the voting booth. But the thing is, if you don't like any of the candidates and their lists in your district, if you really want, you are free to vote for a candidate in another district. And that's what the write-in line is for, is you can write in a different candidate. You don't have to write out their whole list, right? The list is public and ahead of time, so it's just assumed. But
does your vote then count in another district?
I can't remember the exact way. I think effectively yes is kind of the way it ends up working out. But I can't remember that exact detail.
Hare, I think he's the inventor of STV. His original plan was to do something more like IRV, but you could vote anywhere in any district and have your ballot transferred around.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought STV was almost like an accident when he was like organizing kids into like groups or something.
So I haven't read the original paper. What I have read is John Stuart Mill's summary of it in Considerations on a Representative Government.
Interesting.
So I think he originally published a pamphlet, and it was referenced by John Stuart Mill. So this is like 1850 something. And now it was like 5 years ago I read it, so I mean I could be a little bit off, but I would say that his original conception was something about being able to vote kind of anywhere, or maybe running something like STV across the entire country instead of having it just 5-member district. But it quickly becomes complicated, right?
Yeah, but so the some of the advantages of place specifically for the United States is that, like, all right, so right now Congress has a law in place. It could totally be repealed. It's not in the Constitution. It's not an amendment that prohibits multi-winner districts for the U.S. House of Representatives, and so this is something that a large state could, with many representatives, could pass and still retain those single winner districts, retain the precinct sum ability, so you don't sacrifice election security. You don't need new voting machines because there's still just choose one at the end of the day. You do need to redesign the ballots, but you can use the same machines, and you can get proportionality in this way, and you are, even though it's only choose one voting, through this delegation process, this endorsement process, this asset voting process, you are sort of able to artificially increase the level of expressiveness on the ballot in a way. And so that's what I like about place for the United States, is that, like, it checks some of these, like, peculiar boxes that are, like, very difficult and important in the US that make it, like, a lot easier to actually get implemented and start to, and like get some positive progress. Now, I don't necessarily believe that it's the best voting proportional method for everything everywhere, but for the U.S., that's how I feel personally. It hits it checks off some of those important boxes, those practical logistical.
I'd be curious to see exactly how it's written that you can't have multi-winner systems. In Canada, we have a concept of proportionate representation. So proportionate, not proportional. And that's that the number of representatives has to be proportionate to the number of people on the province level. So you can't have multi-winner districts that, say, go over the boundaries of each province when you're talking about making the federal parliament. So you have to have, like, kind of the same ratio of seats per voters in each province. And so that's been a constraint on a number of the multi-member systems. So you couldn't have just a standard mixed member proportional in Canada, because that voting for a party, those seats, you don't know which province they're really assigned to, and so it would violate our constitution. And I like that. I like that piece of the Constitution that says that you have to have it. I would actually want it even smaller. I would divide it up and say that you really have to have proportionate representation on a very granular level, not just on the provincial level.
Yeah, and I think I've been wanting to do this the whole time we've been talking, but there hasn't been a good chance. I think it would be good to go over some of the popular proportional representation methods and just define what they are, just explain them, so people have an idea of what the hell we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes.
Probably should have done this first, but maybe you can edit it back to the beginning.
I'll edit it around. But I mean, it is a live stream, but like I said, I'll make that playlist. So let's start with single transferable vote. Describe that for us.
So single transferable vote is it's probably one of the most popular systems in Canada. It's 5-member districts. You rank everybody, and then you're
not allowed to rank multiple candidates equally. By the way, you can't do that with this method.
There's a lot of different variations. There might be one. I'm not an expert on STV because basically they're all subpar. So, what you then do is start eliminating candidates just like you would in IRV until you get down to 5. There's some surplus handling mechanisms in there to make sure that if somebody gets more than a fifth of the votes, that they get elected, put aside, and then those get transferred. So there's kind of a two-way transfer. You transfer off the top, you transfer off the bottom kind of at the same time. And then you just keep doing that until you're down to 5 people and you're done. So that's STV.
Yeah, and then MMP mixed member proportional is also another popular method that people talk about. You
Yeah.
mind describing that to us?
So mixed member proportional is mixed because it's the combination of party list, which is just single choose one voting for parties and choose one voting for people, and you mash them together so that you can actually do the proportional representation calculation. So you run the existing system with, let's say, half as many ridings or districts, and then you have another ballot that they fill at the same time where you just vote for parties, and then you do the math for how many people got voted for and they represent their party, and then how disproportionate is it, or how disproportional is that, and then you use that calculation against the check boxes for the parties in order to do the math, balance things out in the end.
Yeah,
So
and
it's a combination of the two worst systems to make a mediocre system.
yeah, and just real quick, I guess we'll highlight the idea is that with voting for parties in a proportional method is that okay, you figure out how many in a given parliament how many seats each party gets, and then depending on whether you have closed list, open list, or something in between, the party decides or determines
Yeah,
which candidates or which representatives from the party actually get those seats.
yeah.
Um,
And there's a lot of different variations that people have been coming up with. So one is about like how do you actually do the calculation of who gets what seat. Another interesting one that's come out in Canada, because one of the motivations for this was the need for proportionate representation. Another one is the complaints about lack of like accountable representation. So what they're doing is they're doing the calculations in smaller and smaller districts. So you'd actually like take 5 areas together and then do the calculation within there. Some of these don't, ironically enough, don't end up actually being proportional by some definitions. So the one proposed for Quebec, I don't think it passes the Hare quota criteria, which is like a pretty standard way to define proportionality. So the more they try and fix one thing, they're rubbing up against other things, and so like I said, combining two systems to make a mediocre system. If I was to choose the best MMP system, I would choose dual member proportional, which is probably, I don't know if the inventor, I think his name's Sean Graham, if he'd actually classify it as a type of MMP, but it kind of is. So you get one vote, but that vote counts both for your party and for the candidate, and then you do some math and you get 2 people from each riding, dual member. But that the math is done across the whole area. It has some it has some issues, but I think it's better than any of the other MMP systems I've seen.
yeah, and I'll say MMP is precinct summable. Yes. Yeah, it should be. 'Cause you're
Yes,
really
but
only
you have to talk with you have to go back and forth to the central authority to get a,
well.
maybe not back and
Ultimately,
forth.
you so
To
long
do,
as
to
you
do the
know.
PR calculation, somebody has to do that centrally. You can
Yeah, the
sum.
PR calculation can be done centrally, but in terms of like, um, but like anybody can do it is my point. Like precincts can
Yeah,
are
that's
able that's the thing that matters is that like you don't have to physically truck ballots to a central location. Like that is the issue. That's
sure,
that's
sure. Yeah,
that's what
you can pass on the information, but I mean, in this digital age, is that really the hard line you're going to put? Like, we could just send all
I
of the
mean.
information on all of the ballots.
In the U.S., it is. I mean, again, it's like I mean, in Maine, Maine, the state of Maine trucks their ranked choice voting ballots to a central location to be tabulated, right? And then in New York City, we just had this with the Democratic mayoral primary where they brought it all to a central location, and then there was no way to audit it, and then the New York City Board of Elections added in a bunch of test ballots in with the actual bunch of real ballots, and it was like this whole mess. And it was like, man, what a great way to screw things up is by putting it at one. But if each
Sure.
precinct is able to like individually report results in like a reasonable way, like to the media, and then anybody can take that and then tabulate, it's like you still retain that like local level auditability.
But if
Um,
your issue is auditability, there's better ways to solve that.
well, I mean,
I
auditability is part of it. It's more about preventing scaled attacks on elections. That is, I think, really the end of the
Sure.
day what it comes down
So,
to for
so
me.
what I would do is have a backup. I don't know if you how familiar you are with Yi, the inventor of the
Yeah,
diagrams.
copy me. Yeah,
So he started with basically he got into this through like looking at election integrity.
yeah,
So I'd take a page from his book and I'd go with the score system kind of no matter what.
yeah.
But what I would do is you fill out your bubble card or whatever it is, you bring it up to a scanner, you look on the scanner that if it scanned it properly, you say yes, you put your ballot in, so you have a hard copy and electronic copy. That electronic tabulation will happen in microseconds after the end of everything, and then you still have the ability to audit, so you can do risk limiting audits, and so you can check what's the sum across all candidates in a local district. So you can do that precinct summability and just check, does it match the electronic records? If not, there's an issue. And so I would say that gives that robustness. And then the actual calculation later, you can let the computer do that. And you can make this all transparent. If you say in this district, or in this precinct, I guess, in this precinct, these are the ballots that were cast. You obviously anonymize the names or whatever, but then anybody can do the math. And then you could say, hey, with these ballots cast, if we ran RRV, this is the result we would have had. If you run anything, you could get the different results. And I think that would be a much more transparent and pretty robust against fraud because you have a physical copy that you could always rescan or retabulate or tabulate by hand. And you have the electronic one, which makes it shareable, auditable, and the calculation error is going to be low.
Yeah, and we that's what we do with in a lot of the U.S. that does use voting machines is you have the paper ballot, and then you put it into a scanner, and so then the paper ballots are retained, and the precincts can then always recount. If they're called in that precinct, but then it's electronically submitted, for if they're called for
Do they
recount,
check the variance between the electronic count and the manual count very often? Is that a thing that happens regularly?
often enough, from what I understand.
Okay.
But so yeah, so we don't need to spend too much time on that because we're still defining voting methods here.
Sure.
So the UK right now, I believe, uses single member proportional. Is that correct? So
Oh, they use single member plurality, the same as Canada. I
okay,
believe that there are some areas that I think Scotland uses something. I don't really know every system for everywhere, but I know that the federal parliament is elected in the same way as us. They have the Westminster system, so it's identical.
yeah, and just describe it real quick so the Americans
Yeah, so first past the post or choose one plurality or whatever you want to call it. You get one vote in your district for one person, and the person who gets the most votes in that district goes to parliament.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, cool. So we covered STV, we covered MMP, we covered SMP, I covered place, and now real quick, I know somebody in the comment is mentioning a specific bill HR 2275, and I'll come around to that in a little bit for you, but I want to finish on the thought that we're on. We had mentioned allocated score and sequentially spent score.
Sure.
And so if you want to describe those so people have an idea of kind of like where the science is at right now in terms of talking about
Yeah.
some of these
So
cardinal proportional methods.
those are, like I said earlier, pretty similar systems. So there's score ballots, something like 5 members per district, and the first winner in both systems is the same. That's the person in the district with the highest sum of score. After that, the distinction between the two systems is that in sequentially spent score, you subtract off the amount of score they gave to the winner from their total. So you have 5 star or score points at the beginning. You voted 3 for the winner, then your vote weight is now 2/5. So you spend 3 of 5. Like spending is in the title, so you think about spending. You're spending your $5 or whatever. You have 2/5 left. Everything else on your ballot is then scaled to be 2/5 as powerful as it was beforehand. In allocated score, the idea isn't to reweight, but to try and get the most favored people. So you rank everybody by how much they scored the winner, and you take the top hair quota. And then that causes different ballots in the next round, and the two systems will diverge from there. But you keep selecting by the sum after the different reweighting or allocation, and you keep going till you get 5. So those are those two systems.
Yeah, and real quick, just because CGP Grey got it wrong, help us with hair quota and droop quota, and what those are about real quick, and why they're relevant to proportional methods.
Right. Didn't know he got it wrong, but he got a lot of stuff wrong, so that's okay. A hair quota is basically you just divide up the population by the number of winners. So it's if it's 5 members per riding, a hair quota is a 5th. Droop quota, which I don't favor, we can maybe get into that, is 1/5 plus 1. So it's a 6th. So you divide it up into a 6th. There's reasons for doing that. I don't find them convincing, but it just lowers the threshold. So if you want to get a hair quota to win or a droop quota to win, the threshold is lower in a droop quota.
Yeah, and so the idea of like how quotas are used in proportional representation, is that the idea is if you have 5 seats, each candidate should only have to, you earn 20% to win that seat, but if you get 25% of the vote, that extra 5% then gets sort of transferred down into additional candidates based on how the voters voted, and then every method does it in a different way is effectively then where we start to differentiate.
The way I like to say it is that if 2/5 of the population like you and your clone should win.
Okay, yeah, there we go. And so that you get that. That's kind of where I said factions. So there's a faction that's 40%, and if there's 5 seats, then they should win 2 seats. Is the idea.
Exactly. I try to get away from that concept of factions because I don't want people to think about as if we have factions. I know that it looks like we have factions, but if you actually look at polling data, and this is actually a side project I'm working on right now.
That's a good point.
Writing some papers. If you do, say, political compass or any other way to put people in a multidimensional space, there is not clumps. There is a pretty homogeneous, more like a bell curve or a multidimensional bell curve. A lot of people in the center, and it goes out to fringes. From the discourse, you see, if you go on Twitter, it looks like there's 2 very big groups and nobody in the middle. This is not reality. Even in Congress or whatever, there isn't 2 groups. There's people in the middle, and it's a bit dipped. So instead of it being like a Gaussian or a bell curve, it's like maybe double peaked. But if you look at the actual population, the highest percentage of people are in the middle.
Yeah, and a lot of that, and we don't see that because we have choose one voting, and now we also have social media, which puts us into echo chambers.
Yeah, and we have so choose one voting is kind of equivalent to a partisan system because you get to choose one, and that leads to was it Dulverger's law that means that you're going to get all those effects that makes it basically the same as partisan voting, which makes me very concerned about partisan voting in general. And I don't think that the trade-off that you get for PR makes it, I wouldn't trade more partisanship for better PR. It's like you're getting more partisanship, but you're fair to the parties. Like, how does that work out? How's that helping me? How's it helping the people?
So I'm trying to think. That's probably good on methods. I don't think we need to really dive in any more than that. But so you kind of talked about.
We could do single winner systems. I mean, we did do approval. Everybody knows approval, hopefully.
Yeah, I talk about single winner systems. I talk about single winner systems all the time. Like I said, as you know, I had Sarah Wolk on. I also had Felix Sargent on as well.
Right.
My followers are pretty familiar with the single winner systems.
Can I give a plug for my single winning system?
Okay, go for it.
So,
Oh, Stellar.
stellar, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's stellar, and the name is purposely a takeoff of star because it's very similar to star.
Mm-hmm.
So the star, as we know, you score candidates, you take the top two going to finalists and a runoff, and then the finalist with the most winners or the most uh, favored candidates wins. What I don't like about this is that it's that runoff is a majoritarian type of runoff where the majority wins. And this isn't always what we want. Sometimes we want the centrist candidate to win. And I can give some examples if anybody wants to go to the Stellar page, STLR, on ElectoWiki. They can look up how that works. And so what it does is the L instead of the A in star, it's a leveled runoff. And so what you do is you scale the weight of your ballot up to 5. So if you had say a 1 and a 2 for the finalists, that would go to a 5 and a 2.5. So that the ratio of those two, you're still giving the same proportional in a different sense here, endorsement for those candidates, but they're maximized in the sense that your ballot is now giving the most weight possible. So if you left it at 1 and 2, that's how score voting works. And that just kind of means you weren't looking at polls well. You should have given at least one of the finalists a 5, but we shouldn't have to worry about that because that's basically saying you need to strategically vote. Star solves that problem. It does it in a somewhat majoritarian way. Stellar recovers the utilitarianness of score while reweighting. And it's more complicated, obviously. It took me longer to explain. But I think it is marginally better. Mm-hmm. And then we get into the complexity versus
the ratio of simplicity
accuracy trade-off, where I think it loses to star. And so then I default back to star.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to note is that in the U.S. We have a lot of states with majority clauses in their election codes, and so that's something that star voting can satisfy. Maybe.
And it should be said that a lot of people like majoritarian systems over utilitarian systems. They feel that it's more democratic in some way. I don't.
I think it's for bad reason. I think it's just because that's what people have been led to believe, not because that's what it is. I don't think that's like the natural way of human thinking. I think that is just what people have been taught, is that majority is democratic.
I agree. And you'd think that we'd be going the other direction because there's so much talk nowadays about, not marginalizing people. And so if you're saying I'm okay with letting 51% get whatever they want, that is basically a whole scale endorsement for marginalization.
Yeah, and I think the thing is people just don't connect the dots. Did you see my star voting TikTok series?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
I saw it on YouTube.
Yeah, I put it on YouTube. It's easier to watch on YouTube. But yeah, so I very explicitly highlighted that. I literally said majority is not democracy. Democracy is about building consensus. Which is a strong
democracy
stance.
Is not Latin for majority rules. It's Latin for people rule. And there's a bunch of different ways you can define that.
Yeah. So somebody had asked about this act in the comments, and I'm looking it up here, and it's in the U.S. It's from 1967. Says it's about congressional redistricting, and so I'm not aware of this. I'm not gonna read through all of the text on stream right now, but so I apologize to you, Ruben. I'm not gonna go deep into this. Oh, actually, it looks like it's pretty short, I think. But feel free to I'll just say feel free to ask me about it again, like over Twitter or whatever. You can go to voteforsass.com/connect. You can send me a private message and I can take a deeper look into it and we can have another conversation about it. Or I can look at it next week when I don't have a guest on, or on a week I don't have a guest on, and we can do a deeper dive. This looks interesting. And then Adam said, why should we care about proportional representation if we do not use proportional representation in the U.S.? So Adam, I'll say that's kind of what the whole conversation today is that is like should we adopt proportional representation in the U.S.? How should we do it? And so we've been kind of talking about all the different methods and kind of the differences between the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, where the movements are at, what people do and don't understand about it, and to try to get our heads wrapped around it, because it is a much deeper issue than I think a lot of people realize.
I mean, for the record, we don't have proportional representation in Canada either, but
currently, no.
Currently.
But people are fighting for it.
And we did in the past. We had it in Alberta, but there was some issues and it got repealed. So, I mean, if there's a justification for having it in our house, there's a justification for having it in your house. It's roughly the same system now, and the arguments would all apply similarly.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, we touched on this earlier, but that I want to highlight is that like there is this narrative that we will be stuck in a two-party system until we have proportional representation. But historically, that's not true. It's not true. Historically, nations have always broken out of two-party systems first in order to get proportional representation. In most cases, actually, with choose one voting with a top two runoff. In a lot of cases, is actually how they manage to do that. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases.
Yeah. So what tends to happen, if I recall the historical review, is that a country will do kind of what Canada has done. We basically have three viable parties, and that schism happens first, and then because of the obvious unfairness of that then you're stuck with vote splitting in the current system. Then people say, okay, no, we need to make it fair for the parties, and that's the major justification for proportional representation. I think that is probably the worst justification for proportional representation, because I don't care about how fair we are to the parties. I am not at all concerned about the parties themselves or the party, like the bureaucracy that happens inside the party. I care about the people, and I care about the representatives, and I care about the functioning of the government. So all the arguments for proportional representation for me come from, is this fair to the people? Who's being unrepresented? How can we improve representation for people in various ways? It's not about parties, although that's how they tend to justify it. So maybe the Forward Party is going to get some momentum, and they will come off as a third party. I know the Libertarians for a little while looked like they were going to get somewhere, but they never really got off the ground.
Well, there's the Tea Party movement thing that happened within the Republican Party.
Would that split? I don't know. Trump almost split the Republicans, but I think there's just too much pressure. Like if Trump didn't split the Republicans, there's just too much pressure keeping the parties together because there's too much at stake. Mm-hmm. And so like they split out and they fight, but it always just kind of collapses back down into the two. Mm-hmm. I suspect Andrew Yang will fold the Forward Party if he doesn't get electoral reform, and kind of those people will just kind of go back to being Democrats.
Yeah, and on a note on the Forward Party, and Sarah and I talked about this a little bit, is so he's stuck on ranked choice voting. Unfortunately, Andrew Yang is.
He did say he's a big fan of approval
and star. And so we have been very active in getting in contact with the Forward Party, trying to get Andrew Yang's attention on this. But I am currently working on a new Condorcet method that is where you don't need to show the public the preference matrix. You can present it much simpler and without sacrificing accuracy. And so I'm not going to get into that too much today, but basically it's basically Copeland plus margins effectively, but even simpler. So I won't get into that, but the idea is like, if we name it something very close to ranked choice voting, like ranked advantage voting or ranked better voting or something, ranked preference voting or something, then maybe we
make
could
something plural, ranks choice voting. Ranks,
right, yeah, just add like an AD, ranked choice voting, right?
Exactly.
Then
Yang could switch without anybody knowing he switched. Oh no, this is what I like all along.
Yeah, that's the idea. Is to get him to be able to not have that backlash. And so like we're focused on this. I'm actually going to present it at the Equal Vote Board meeting coming up, which I'm super excited about. So that's Yeah, so we're in an interesting space with that for sure. But you're very right that like historically what has happened is you get this three-party thing, and people are like, this is, people finally realize how much of a mess it all is, and that the voting needs to change, and then that leads to proportional methods and
Because the
parliamentary
point
systems.
is choose one plurality is perfectly fine when there's two choices.
Yeah, exactly.
There are no issues with there's two choices.
Hmm.
And so you tend to default back to two choices because that gets rid of the issues. And then the issue is that there's only two choices.
Yeah. So all right, I gotta go through. I've been ignoring the comments here. Summarize. So this is from Ruben talking about that that act. So summarizing, it states that there are equal districts for each representative, which means we can't use at-large or multi-member districts. Look into it. Clay brought it to my attention. Yeah, I mean, and so that's kind of the thing we got to work around unless we want to change something in Congress. Adam says where to find test cases and expected test results using star voting. What is the methodology / algorithm? So if you're looking at talking about simulations, you can look up Jameson Quinn's voter satisfaction efficiency models, which you can find on starvoting.us/accuracy. So I'll throw it in the chat right now. But I know that there is a paper that you and Jameson and some others have worked on and is currently going through peer review. I don't know how much you can say about it right now, but I am super pumped. Do you want to say anything on that paper?
Sorry, me?
Yeah, didn't you and Jameson and Mark, you guys just
I
wrote
don't know
an
if, I don't know
academic
if
paper together?
paper is the right word, but there is definitely some documentation we have. Paper as in submitted to a journal, not so much. It's basically, and honestly, it's been a while since we've done this. We all have day jobs, remember?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea would be to try and summarize the whole purpose and results of the review we did of all the PR systems. And so I got into a bit of that today. And I think honestly, it'd be better off as a book. But
That's how long it is.
it'd be a very heady book, and there'd be a few chapters that were incomplete because we don't have all the answers yet.
Sarah told me that you guys also did more simulations of single winner methods too, though, right?
Jameson did. My simulations focused on multi-winner.
Okay.
What I would really like to do, and this is the big question for me. Earlier, I said you can get maybe halfway to fully proportional by choosing approval. That's a hunch. I suspect that it's true, but we don't know if in reality that's actually true. What I would really like to see is probably for star or something like that. How proportional do we expect star to be relative to, say, a single transferable vote? Because the assumption is that there are no parties there are no districts that the small parties will be able to win. But that's assuming that every district is the same, and that's just a false assumption. There are districts that are heavily for every single party, and so in the wash, how well does that actually end up lining up? I wouldn't be surprised to find out that star in practice is a lot more proportional than most PR enthusiasts expect, and if that's true, then it gives us kind of everything, right? Like it gives us PR not really on paper, but in practical matters, it gives us enough. So if we get above the 20% issue, which is still kind of loosely defined. So like 20% because if you have 20% of a 5-member district, you get a candidate. So I don't even know how we would define those things. A lot of these things aren't nailed down very well. So if we could come up with a way to compare across all different PR systems, I'd love to see them on some sort of a metric, or maybe we'd have to use several different metrics and look at them on different metrics. But the simulations are hard. The definitions are not decided upon. But I really think that that's the way that we need to go, because I think that the next step is a single winner system. I don't think going fully PR is going to happen. Fair vote strategy, like I said earlier, is to do a citizens assembly, convince them on PR, which is probably fairly easy to do, and then skip the referendum. And I think that's a viable backdoor strategy. We will see if there's protests in the streets over skipping the referendum. But I think that that's one path forward. The other path forward is go to a better single winner system, and then wait a little while while that equilibrates, and then getting to a PR system based on that system would be easy. So if you went to Star, then you could go to Star PR in a decade or something like that.
Yeah. So I want to keep going through these comments here. So you mentioned test cases for PR. So I know you've done some you've published some simulations of proportional methods over the years, and so most of that's going to be what on the election science GitHub, right?
Oh, I don't think so.
You know what? I do have B-Ternary Tau keeps a collection of every voting simulation ever, and I have the link.
I have given it to her, and I don't remember who it was because somebody set up the GitHub for me and helped me edit the code, and so yeah, it was kind of a joint project for that, and it ended up on their GitHub, their personal GitHub.
Yeah, here's the link to every voting simulation ever, basically. So I just put that in the chat. And so you go through and check that out. Even more general, where to find more info on proportional representation. Adam, if you go to the starvoting.us, Sarah just updated the page for proportional representation, so you could find out more about it there. I said kind of like BTR. Actually, look up Black's method. That's what my Condorcet is kind of similar to, but the finalist kind of conditions a little bit different, and it's a tournament style borda. You can check out the election science Discord in the voting method test kitchen. You can see I have like a whole thread going in there. What is STV? How good? How bad is it? Yeah, Adam, I suggest you take a look back through this live stream later. I don't want to rehash everything with Keith while I have him ranked for voting too. Would you be okay to upgrade US system to STV? I heard RTV is bad, but supposedly STV is not bad. Is it true? Personally, I would say single winner instant runoff voting is really awful. STV, I think, in 2021 is subpar for proportional representation, but it was the best that we had for a long time, or a better method for a long time.
100 years ago.
100 years ago, yeah. And so that's why so many places, I don't want to say so many, that's why it was adopted in some places.
Yeah, a handful of places have it, yeah.
A handful of places have it because it's what they had at the time. And then why not write book on Google Docs, proportional representation using Star and ST and Stellar, and you get help for PR. Oh yeah, so all right, Adam's good. And Adam, you can always message me personally. I know you do all the time, and we can always get you links and stuff. And Keith is also on the Star Voting Slack. I don't know how much time you spend on that Slack. Probably not very much, but
Sarah's been pushing me to spend more time on there, so I've been on there a fair bit. The best place to ask questions is in the voting theory forum.
Voting theory forum, yeah. Who John he runs that. I actually posted my Condorcet method on there recently too.
Yeah, we need more people there. I mean, we had so many people on the Center for Election Science forum, and then when that went away, not many people migrated to this new one.
The Discord is pretty active. We just split the voting theory channel into 3 different channels. So there's voting theory, there's voting method test kitchen, and then there's like pragmatics and logistics and real world implementation channel. And then
is that private or
what?
That's a CES thing.
Yeah, that's a CES. Yeah, so they have a Discord, and that's pretty easy to get on if you just go to the site. And so there's a lot of activity there. And then they're just a Star Voting activist, just like 2 or 3 days ago, just started a Star Voting Discord. And oh my goodness, the amount of momentum she's gaining and the number of activists she's grabbing right now is astounding. And so like we're talking to Sarah and like, okay, we need to get a meeting going and we need to like set up bots so like people like Sarah and the staff at Equal Vote can like post stuff and we'll just automatically post on the Discord too, so we don't end up like splitting people, so we have better coordination there. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of activity happening there. And then iBot said, isn't STV used for house in one district? I thought I heard that, or was that city council? So in Cambridge, Massachusetts, STV is used for something local. And then STV is also used, I think there's one other place. I know that there are two places that use multi-winner block instant runoff, or one of them does or two of them in Utah. Sorry, two of them in Utah, and then Minneapolis is like adopting it right now or something. On the Discord link, if you go to electionscience.org, electionscience.org, and then I think actually /Discord actually works as a link. So we'll try that. Here, let me put an https:// on there. I think that will work. So yeah, just a couple little things. Sweet. Well, I mean, we've been at this for almost an hour and a half. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about, Keith, or anything else you wanted to address, or questions?
No, I think that about covers it. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for introducing me to a bunch of new people. I'm around. People are welcome to email me, but please have a question that you can't Google if you're going to ask a question. Another place that you didn't give a shout out to was the Reddit and First Past the Post forum is very active.
It's very active. The culture has been getting better over the last few months, but
it's Reddit. I would say that the culture there is good for Reddit.
Yes. It can be a little aggressive at times. But yeah, so that's another good place, it's another place you can go if you want to have very serious discussions.
Well, I would say they tend to joke around a bit more, and it's fairly low level. It's not, the voting theory forum that Jack does is very high level.
That's a good point. That one, yeah, gets very, very, very mathy. Sweet. Okay. Well, yes. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have you on. And Keith, you are free to share this live stream with anybody. Like I said, it'll be available on YouTube for free. And if you want to download it and just put it up and send clips to or whatever.
Sure. I hate watching myself. I don't know if you do it, but I can't do it. So I'll probably never watch it.
That's fine. Sweet. Yeah. Well. All right. Well, let me. I want to end the stream, but thank you everyone